Maple here, crimson maple. It's a cultivar of a Norway maple, and it's owned by people that live in this condominium here. There's two condos there. This one on the right side. This is basically their front yard. Street access is here, and this is the driveway area. And they've just the tree's growing in such a way that it's overtaken the front yard. They're not able to grow any grass underneath it. It's crowding the whole area out, and so we have to prune it. It's not only what's good for the tree, but it's what the customer needs. So you can see that we're on the north side of the building here, so that the building is already blocking quite a bit of the light that reaches this area. And then these branches over here are now growing up next to the building, creating a complete light box. So we're going to try to tip them back as much as possible, thin them out and tip them back, and then balance that with the rest of the tree. And more than that, what we're going to do here, due to the structure of this tree, there's no real central main leader in this tree. The tree divides up and has many different branches going up. And because there's no central main leader, there's no apical dominance. And so the tree's growing equally in all directions. So what we're going to plan on doing here is trimming it back in a way where we allow 2 or 3 of these main limbs growing up into the center of this tree to remain unpruned, and then prune back the entire rest of the tree. It doesn't have to be pruned back very far, just enough to give apical dominance to the section we want to encourage to grow up, and then we want to discourage the tree from growing out. So we're going to trim that all back, and that should work. With this other maple here, we're going to tip that back to create a little space between the two trees, which again will open up a little bit of open sky, and therefore there will be some direct sun making its way to the ground. You can see how thick the shadows are underneath this Norway maple here. Because of the size of these leaves and the thickness of the canopy, it's very difficult to get light penetration enough to grow grass. The customer came in and put some mulch down, which is not a bad idea. Another thing is, I normally don't like to remove lower limbs. In this case, some of these smaller limbs, like you can see, that's probably a 2-inch limb right there. And certainly that's like a 1-inch limb there. Can be removed. Again, what they'll do is they will suck up the last little bit of light that makes its way to the ground. And so you can increase the light quite a bit by removing some of these smaller limbs. But again, I wouldn't cut this limb. That limb's what, 4 inches or something. But I take these 2 portions off and tip back the tips. There's that limb right there, dead center of the camera. That can go, as that's just growing up and interfering with the rest of the center of the tree. And we'll do some more thinning, but again, smaller cuts as much as possible on these main trunk areas, trying to get in crossing branches off, etc., create a better structure for the tree, and thin the tree, and then we'll work the tips back. And again, I might, well, it's just difficult to see from here, but I may leave that little guy up there would be the new leader. So, you know, cut those tips back 4 or 5 feet even, and some of the smaller branches less. But that's the plan right now. We'll see how it looks. Because there's not a really good central tie-in point, I may actually work this with the power pruner from the ground on some of these branch tips out here. I'll start by thinning the tree out, removing some of these lower limbs, as we discussed, some of these crossing branches here. Like that's a little messy situation there. That'll have to be straightened out. And once the tree has been thinned out, then I'll start working those tips back. And I'll figure out which tips I'm going to leave completely untouched to develop apical dominance. Then I'll start working the rest of the tips back in some type of organized fashion, some type of system. Work the entire tree all the way around. Here's another limb that's going to be removed. You can see right there, there's the base of that small limb. And it just reaches up, comes around behind, it comes all the way out over here. Not even the side of the tree it's growing from. So it's crossing over a lower limb. And that'll get going. Then we'll cut that as well. Hopefully it'll look good. Still maintain a real nice healthy structure and no major areas for decay to enter the main trunk. keep all the cuts to a minimum in diameter wise on the main trunk so that the tree can easily compartmentalize off the decay. Okay, here we are at the end of round 1. And you can see all this brush here, mostly from a little bit from the center there and the peripheral edges. Cut it back slightly here, and there's a lot more light getting its way to the ground right now. And the tree has actually a better shape. It's not quite so overwhelming for the look of the front yard. It was all done with the power pruner from the ground. And you can see when I cut with the power pruner, I leave little stubs. That way I don't scratch up the collars or the trunk accidentally. And I can always finish these cuts when I get up into the tree a little bit later. I can always finish the cut later and clean up those stubs. You have a lot less control with that power pruner than you do with a handsaw or even a chainsaw. And yet at the same time, with these lower branches out of my way, it'll make it a lot easier for me to climb. I still have plenty to do to thin out the center of this tree. It's a fairly young tree, and so I'm going to prune this quite a bit harder as far as overall percentage of branches that I would take, both for the purpose right now, which is to get some light in here and to bring this tree into the proper shape. I took off crossing branches. There was a crossing branch that was removed there. Left very few large cuts on the actual trunk itself. Here's a cut on the trunk itself. It's under 2 inches. 10 minutes into this tree, power pruner really helps out a lot. The cuts, I don't like the way, the cleanliness of the cuts on a power pruner. However, when you're working on branch tips, there's a branch tip. Now when you're working on a branch tip like that, even that little stub is not going to affect the overall health of the tree. The further you are away from the trunk of the tree, the less important a good clean target cut becomes. And whereas when you're on the trunk, target pruning becomes very, very important. And that's beyond the scope of this video. Now you can actually see the tree's starting to look more like it belongs in this front yard here, instead of just totally overwhelming. And there's going to be quite a bit more, which actually there's clouds up now. We took a couple fairly sizable branches out of that little red maple, adjacent red maple, opened up that area of sky between the 2 trees. And there's going to be quite a bit more sun coming down here, surely enough for them to grow grass, which was their concern. They just want to grow some grass in their front yard. Not too much to ask in a suburban situation. In order to keep enough light on this lawn to grow grass, the trees are going to require some maintenance. This is the first step, and every 2, 3, 4 years from now on, they're going to have to be pruned again. And you can see it still looks like a tree. A little backlit here, so it's tough to say. Tough to see how well this is coming off on camera, but the tree's definitely been thinned out. Those are actually the only 2 leaves that were untouched. Everything else was pruned. I'm trying to leave those 2 leaves to be dominant. And I especially hit it hard on this side, and I know it looks like I hit it too hard, but it's a young, vigorous growing tree. It will fill in very quickly. And again, this was the southern exposure here. Trying to get more light onto the lawn here. So we left quite a bit of open sky between the tree and the house, and also the 2 trees here, and a little room between the tree and the crabapple, both trees and the crabapple. Again, there's quite a bit more light moving through the tree. The tree's been tipped back so that it doesn't have quite as wide a drip line, and there'll be a lot more light going through here. You can see I kept the large cuts on the trunk to an absolute minimum. That's probably one of the biggest ones right there. A couple of smaller cuts there. There's some room up in the tree. There's some open sky showing. A lot of these branches were heading cuts made. Let's see if I get a good angle. There's a pretty serious heading cut. Now, you can see I left a little stub there. That doesn't bother me on the branch tips. That's not going to affect the health of the tree at all. There's a cut right there. on the trunk. Another cut was made up in here, and some cuts up here. And up here. And then the tips were cut back there and there. This front side here towards the building, I took quite a bit more off of this side than the other side. Although the top center, there's 2 leads up there that were left untouched, and every other branch on this tree was pruned back. The idea again is to subordinate the outward growth of the tree and encourage more of an upward growth, as well as to tuck the tree back in to make it fit in the front lawn area and bring a lot more light in by creating open sky between the tree and the building, popping a lot more holes in the canopy so that diffuse light makes it through to the ground, removing some of the smaller lower branches so that they don't suck up the last little bit of diffuse light, creating some space between the 2 trees here, between this maple and the other maple and the crabapple and the 2 maples, so there's a little open sky for the sun to make its way through to this ground area. You can see this is all moss, there's hardly any grass. It's all growing down in this area. Now they should be able to have plenty of sun to grow grass, get their front yard back again. Encourage them to leave this bed around the tree. These 2 leads are the ones those are basically the ones that were left untouched so that they'll have apical dominance. And then this side was cut back pretty radically, and as was this side, touched back not quite so much as the side by the house. But in any case, with the age of the tree and the species of the tree and the vigor of the tree, I have no doubt that this tree was not over pruned to an extent that it's going to really damage the health of the tree. The tree will come back, it'll grow, put on more growth and much more green leaves over the next 2-3 years, and probably need another pruning again. Okay, take one more look at this tree. You can see it still looks like a tree. It's still got a fairly decent shape. And I cut this tree hard. I mean, I took a lot out of this tree.